Welcome back to the Copywriters Podcast with your host, the world's greatest copywriting coach, David Garfinkel. David, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Nathan. How are you?
I'm good. And for the video viewers, they already know we got a special guest lined up for today. And looking at the show notes, I'm excited for this episode because it's one of the best things in copywriting right now. So I'm just going to tease it with that and hand it over to you.
Great. Okay, thanks. So our guest today, Aaron Genzler, has been around the block a few times on his path to success in financial copywriting. In 2006, he managed to get a job with an entry-level job with Agora Financial in Baltimore. And that year he met two important people, Joe Schriefer and Jack Ford. This first job began a long and winding road, which got him to where he is today as Chief Marketing Officer for the large financial publisher Mauldin Economics. Aaron's coming on the podcast today to talk about what it really takes to make it in financial copywriting. We'll hear about his own journey as well as some of his experiences training and advocating for younger copywriters and what he has seen that spells bad news for some people trying to get their foot in the door in the first place. Plus, he'll share some in-the-trenches insights about what works and what doesn't work with stories in copywriting. First, let me share this. Copy is powerful. You're responsible for how you use what you hear on this podcast, and most of the time, common sense is all you need. But if you make extreme claims, and if you're writing copy for offers in highly regulated industries like health, finance, business opportunity, you may want to get a legal review after you write and before you start using your copy. My larger clients do this all the time. So, Aaron, welcome. We've known each other for a while, and I'm really glad you're on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. It sounds like we have a lot to cover. Thank you for that very polite, very nice intro.
Hi, you're welcome. We do. So I want to get right into this, especially for people who want to get into financial copywriting. We'll talk about your story in a bit, but what's the number one red flag you see with new copywriters?
In financial specifically, the number one red flag I see with new copywriters is they're very long on techniques of persuasion and very short on the understanding of market mechanics and how investing works for regular folks. The best success that I've had over the years onboarding new copywriters, bringing new copywriters into the business, whether that junior or someone who's more experienced that has been around for a while, you need that deep understanding of the market and how it works and what do markets look like. The changing market, constantly changing market environment for everyday regular investors, our prospects, right? The people that we're trying to build these great relationships with. You need that understanding beyond just the techniques of persuasion.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you don't need it so you can go get a job with Goldman Sachs and start doing research reports, for institutional investors and journalists. You need it. You need to understand how it all works, and then you need to understand how it's going to appear to the customer, right? I mean, that's an additional layer of understanding. And, you can have the best persuasive chops in the world, but if you can't navigate your way through that, right?
Well, no, it's 50-50, especially like you can. I mean, we see offers all the time where you're like this. The case that they're making is very strong, but the proof is so thin, right? That's like a common critique, and that's not just financial. You see that all the time. You get supplement offers in the mail or whatever's working right now. That copy sticks out like a sore thumb. Like, man, they're really pulling out all the stops. They're checking all the boxes when it comes to persuasion. But you get that it's a visceral thing. It's a gut feeling. I just don't quite believe this. I'm just not getting over the hump on this idea. That's what we want to avoid, right? So that's where that deep understanding of the markets is so useful for us.
Yeah, I was looking at a letter. The guy is very experienced, very successful yesterday, but he would make these huge claims about his what do you call it, discovery call, pitch call to sign up for his program. And the claims were unbelievable and the proof was non-existent. And I said, this letter's not going to work too well. I think you need to tone down the claims and build up the proof for what you actually can do. Anyway, yeah, okay, we're on the same page. And certainly in financial, I mean, you've got the most skeptical people in the world as your prospects, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have niche by niche. I'm sure there's skeptical prospects everywhere. I would hope there is. But financial is somewhat unique because people come to alternative finance, and it's just depending upon the offer, depending upon the USP that you're talking about. There could be some play here, some leeway. But people come to alternative finance generally because they've had bad experiences in mainstream finance. They had a pile of money with a broker who was supposed to be full service, and then the COVID crash happened, or 2008, 2009 happened, and they had a bad result. And they're like, well, man, there's got to be something else out there. That's how people find the messages in the first place. So the barriers, the skepticism is so high for so many people that you have to put that credibility, the authority, the trust building, demonstration of results, right? Like you said it a second ago, appropriately couched promises about typical user experience in these things. Like those barriers are high, and it's hard work to not only capture and maintain attention, but then also achieve conversion.
Yeah, I mean, we've pounded the table about research over and over again in this podcast, but I think you're making it very real right now. I appreciate that. All right, so let's talk about you for a second. What did Jack Ford do or share with you in 2008? And we're only talking 2 years in here, right? In 2008, that changed your life.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I've said this before, but I'll tell the story in a little bit different way with a little bit more detail here. So this is the new version of my Jack Ford story.
Okay.
Yeah, I entered the Agora Financial business as a junior copywriter in the fall of 2006. Between the fall of 2006 and the fall of 2008, I put one package in the mail, maybe wrote 2 or 3 back end offers, but I was primarily special reports, emails, these things like tertiary copy, secondary copy. But I had written some packages, and then there was a copywriter get together in the fall of 2008 at Courtemer in France. A bunch of writers. I want to say, I don't remember specifically. I want to say it was 25, 30, maybe 35 writers from around the various Agora businesses, and the senior writers essentially served as small group mentors. We met there for a week, and there were exercises and group discussions, copy exercises and group discussions in the mornings. There was writing time in the afternoon. We'd come back at the end of the day, we'd show our pages, we'd workshop them, we'd go through them. Anyhow, I had this idea that I was working on. I had a few pages. I arrived in France. I arrived to the group with a couple pages on this idea that I had begun working on. And again, like I was learning at the time, but I had no identifiable success yet in the industry. I was like an experienced junior, let's put it that way. Like I had nothing under my belt that recommended me as like on the fast track. No, that wasn't me. Anyhow, they broke us into groups. Jack Ford ended up being the mentor, the copy chief who was assigned to the group that I was in. It was 5, 6 writers. I had met Jack over the course of the 2 years, on and off. I'd had some conversations with him, but he and I had never worked closely together on a piece of copy. Number one, my copy didn't deserve his attention. And number two, he was busy with his own stuff. So why is he going to pay attention? That's just how it is in a business when you're coming up. He reads my 3 pages, and anybody here who knows him, and I actually just retold this story to him recently, so I'm not like betraying any confidence here. He reads my 3 pages, kind of shrugs his shoulders, doesn't smile, doesn't frown, nothing, gives it back to me, and he's like, it's okay. And I remember thinking, okay, so if that's the only feedback I get from Jack, and he didn't tear it to shreds, and he didn't tell me that it was an unworkable idea, and he didn't tell me that it was terrible, that must mean it's worth continuing to work on. And I took that sort of like, it's okay that he did. And I used that as the fuel that got me all the way through the first draft of that package. It ends up, between initial runs and then changes that were made to it, it kind of became a template for a while. And it probably did, all told, it probably did 50, 60 million.
Yeah, that's okay. That's more than okay. That's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
that was over many years, different iterations, different, templated. Like I said, like people that relied on that template. I'm just like, and again, I'm not saying that to brag or anything. There's people out there that put up big numbers, but that was the one. That was the idea. That was the idea that put me, again, not on the fast track. Like it means something different to everybody, but that was the one that put me on the map. That was the one that got me some institutional credibility. That was the one that got me access to better ideas moving forward. And then from there, like it was just building blocks, and you keep doing the work, you stay with it. Here I am, 17 years later, still trucking.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I did back to him real quick. The reason he's the central part of that story when I tell it is because, I mean, he was the GOAT, right? He was at that time in the business. He was the man. If you had even tacit blessing from him on your idea, it meant that success was possible. And in that moment, on that trip, in that group, that's all I needed. And I took that seed and I ran with it.
okay. So I'm going to wander into some dangerous territory because I think you make a really good point that's going to slip by a lot of people. And I want to put it front and center. So we have joked, and a lot of other people have raged about things like participation trophies these days, where um, people are basically getting credit for breathing, nothing. And I think that comes from, I don't know, a generation of kids, a society at large, where people need praise and adulation and approval far in excess of what they've actually done or accomplished. And so what I want to point out is I don't know if it was dumb luck or maturity or just kind of a hard-bitten view of the world where, hey, if everything didn't blow up today, it's the day I'm above ground kind of attitude. I don't know what it was, but I think that's really worth focusing on, that you knew that the baseline was, hey, Aaron, this is a piece of shit. Why don't you try and rewrite it so at least it makes sense? Didn't say that, right? But that's the
Yep.
baseline. So if he says, it's okay, that means, okay, you've got the fundamentals here. Now it's time to start doing the work to improve it. I mean, how did you know that at that point? Or why did you respond that way?
I didn't, and it was revealed, several months later when it was done and it was through the pipe and all that, and it was produced and it began to test, and we saw the really good results. But no, the participation trophy thing, if I can, real quick,
Yeah.
anybody who's
Go ahead.
watching this, of any level of experience that you're dealing with you're freelancing, you're dealing with different businesses, or maybe you're embedded in a business, like your ultimate responsibility is to provide fantastic experience to the customers in that business, and by extension be economically productive for the bottom line of that business. The customer and the bottom line, those are the only two factors that you need to focus on. Who gives you praise, who doesn't, who, like, that was fantastic, like it didn't work, but we'll get them next time. Like, don't walk around looking for that stuff, because people with their eye on the ball, who are focused on the customer and they're focused on the business, don't have time to hold hands, right?
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
get that out of your system. Focus on the customer, focus on the health of the business. That's where you're going to derive your value, and you need to put your focus there.
Right.
100%.
So that's a long-term survival and thriving strategy rather than a dopamine strategy. I like that. Um, could you talk about some hard-won lessons along the way? I mean, I think the Jack Ford one is like enough value for the entire podcast, but I'm not going to stop asking you here. Please keep going.
Yeah, I say this all the time. I'm a huge believer in this. You need to care. You need to be passionate about the ideas. Passion is a very key element for me. If you lose passion, the dip is real, right? Fatigue and these things. If you spend a month on a project and you do all this deep research and then you put it out there and it doesn't give you the result that you want, it can affect you, and it can harm the quality of your work for a short period of time going forward. You have to have strategies, your own strategies. It's different for everybody. You need strategies that you can deploy that help you get out of those low times, those bad times, as quickly as possible, so that you can clear away the cobwebs, get your head clear, and get back to work. Because that's what your customer needs, and that's what back to the customer and the business, right? Like, you can't. There was a time when every win and loss, every success or failure affected my sense of self-worth. You need to find a way to put that down and get back to work the next day. Like, you're going to have offers that go out that, unexpectedly, punch a hole in the sky, and everybody, it's so successful that everybody's laughing until they piss their pants, right? Don't get too high in those times, because the next you're going to beef it on one right around the corner, and don't get too low during those times. So do the work, stay honest to the work, stay honest to the research, serve the customer. Don't get too high, too low. I just said that, and I said that in 2 minutes. I still struggle with that 18 years in. That's a daily piece of the work. And if I can, in communicating that, if I can save a bad part of the dip for one writer out there who's like, you know what, I'm just going to put this to the side. I'm going to come back and I'm going to crush it tomorrow. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do the work. If I can save somebody a day of the dip, then I will have done my job here.
Yeah, that's terrific. Let me make a couple comments. First of all, The Dip is one of the few books by Seth Godin I happen to like a lot, and it's about the fact that after success, or maybe along the way to success, there are low periods, and it's not about avoiding them. It's about getting through them and staying as strong as you can during them. The other thing is, there's this entrepreneurial, people trade their brains for the power of positive thinking. They assume, well, I can't afford the luxury of a negative thought. I'm actually, that's a quote. Our brains aren't wired that way. We're going to have negative thoughts. The question is not whether or not you have them. And what you're talking about is find a strategy to get through it, and to get through it as fast as possible. That's a lot more real world. I really like that.
Yeah. If I want to say one more thing too about hard-won lessons. This is a big one for me. There's no substitute for top of mind, right? Ryan McGrath, I haven't spoken to him in a while, but good guy, great writer. I remember him saying one time that ideas exist in a specific time and place, right? The tide of mass desire, the zeitgeist, the awareness. What are people talking about right now? It's real and it's powerful. You're not going to convince somebody for some left field. You can, right? But that's a different style of copy. That's a different type of offer. Like,
Right.
Stick with what's in the conversation right now, because that's where desire and interest are. You want it to be. You want to funnel that, right? Your idea, your USP. You don't want to go out there and create it, because it just makes everything so much harder. So then you put all this time and effort and research into these ideas that don't work, and then you get in the dip, and then you look back on it a couple months later, and you're like, I was nowhere near the mark to begin with, because nobody cared about that, right? So that's another thing that you pick up over time, and you only learn that with failure.
Yeah. Yes. I understand that those are words of wisdom. Everybody, maybe rewind and listen to that part again. That's really good. Okay. So we were talking, you and I, about having a mentor, or maybe not a mentor, maybe an advocate for your development in your career, and the two types of time saving, the one that's good that involves strategies, and the one that's bad that involves not doing all the work you should do.
Yeah, Jack was one of those early mentors for me. Joe, Greg, guys that I worked with in the business at that time. I was just like, I look back on that so fondly. Like, not only, those are friendships that I have to this day, but they were big on the way I learned. And like, I don't know, this makes me, I guess, like old school. I sound like I'm only 43, but I sound like some fucking, like I'm like, back when I was working with Ogilvy, that's not what I'm trying to say. But
you sound like a sailor. And
yeah.
You sound like the guy. You sound like the bartender in Tube Bar. Have you ever heard that? Okay.
Yeah. Find ways to use the research that you're doing, the ideas that you're building, the conversations that you're having with your gurus, your prospects. Find ways to create shortcuts that positively inform the end result. That's good. That's hacking the process in a responsible, high integrity, customer first way, right?
Mhm.
Those are the tips and hacks and these things. I don't know what the right word is. I don't like what's a hack, right? But like those are the things we should be focused on as professionals because they make us more efficient and they positively inform the quality of the end result. What you don't want to do is focus on the stuff that cuts corners, that decreases the quality or the depth of the research,
Hmm.
that negatively impacts fulfillment, right? Or puts your guru or your product leader or whatever it is for your niche, that puts them in a position where it makes it more difficult for them to fulfill appropriately, right? Don't ever put the person who's out in front of your product, your fulfillment, your service, whatever the case may be, don't ever promise or do anything that puts them in a position that makes it more difficult, because that only leads to headache and heartache down the road, right? So do the work, do the research, and build yourself processes that positively inform the end result. Never do it in a way that cuts corners.
And I especially love the first part because so often we're not talking about cutting corners here, but the right way to do something, the right way to think, to approach something, the steps to take, the right way, the way that works best is counterintuitive. And sometimes you can only learn that through experience. And if you can get someone more experienced to help you cut to the quick on that, can make a huge difference.
Well, and from an advocacy standpoint, too, today, on the other side of some of those relationships, working with junior or less experienced writers, I want to talk about the idea itself in a macro sense, in a big picture sense, as much as we can before you put pen to paper, because I want to ask you as many questions. I want to try and punch as many holes in the idea as I possibly can before you before you go down the road of doing the real work, right? To me, that's a way that, like, based on, such as it is, based on my experience or whatever you want to call it, I can help a writer beat their idea up before you begin that arduous journey and make it as strong as possible. To me, that's just like good. Like, you need to have somebody who's available to do that for you around every idea that you want to build, because that's the type of advocacy that the copy needs to truly develop into everything it can be.
Yeah, it's not a nursemaid. It's tough love, but it's all in the service of is this thing going to even survive in the marketplace, much less be a big hit, be a big winner.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So I want to talk about something else. I've got this new book out. It's called Persuasion Story Code. And I think, Aaron, you're in a unique position to talk about some of these ideas. You have an MFA. I'm not sure if that's in film or not, but or fiction or something like that.
It's
But
in it's in I wrote screenplays as for that for in a majority of the work of the MFA, but yes, it's a fiction MFA.
okay, so you understand screenplays. You've acted in movies, right?
I
Maybe
have.
small,
Well,
small. So you understand this stuff better than most copywriters. Um, Maybe in some ways the best of all because of the multiple experiences you've had, and of course you certainly understand copy. Um, so I want to talk about the hero's journey. Damn, it's important in a good fiction story. It's like necessary. But I think there's been, I'm going to use a word that is both Catholic and agora, a transubstantiation that is
hmm
false. That is
hmm
false. Because a paring knife works really well in the kitchen doesn't necessarily mean it'll work in a knife fight. I mean, it might, but there might be knives that'll work better. And the same thing with the hero's journey. Because it works really well in fiction, I'm not sure it works well in our business as copywriters, as direct response marketers, where we have to make stuff interesting. We also have to stick to the facts. And more important, people don't have an hour and a half to go through our sales letter most of the time. Or if they do, they need more than just a story. Let me read you something and maybe we could talk about it a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. The hero's journey is a very powerful concept. And when you're writing a story for Hollywood or a fiction publisher, the hero's journey is a reliably winning formula. But there are a couple of problems when you try to use it for persuasion. It's complicated and tricky to master. It has many moving parts and takes great knowledge, practice, and skill to create a successful hero's journey story. Besides the difficulty, and this is what I was talking about before the transubstantiation thing, there's another problem. For many experts, the hero's journey has become a deity. These experts worship it as though it were the only kind of story that works for anything. But that's just not true. For the vast majority of persuasion situations, using a hero's journey story is the equivalent of wearing a tuxedo or fancy evening dress to go out in the woods and cut down some trees. Yeah, the fancy clothes the Hollywood in crowd wears to attend the Academy Awards look stunning. The makers of hero's journey stories can be really sharp dressers. And it's easy to see why people accept the idea that the only kind of story that works is a hero's journey story. Americans spend an average of 2 hours, 33 minutes a day watching TV. All the movies and fictional series use some version of the hero's journey to tell their stories. We see these shows and movies over and over again, so it's understandable that anyone would come to the conclusion that when it comes to telling a story in any situation, it's got to be a hero's journey story. Only one problem. Hero's journey stories are not how we talk, most of the time anyway, in real life, especially in business situations. Our everyday language is more casual and straightforward. As for hero's journey stories, well, they're tremendously entertaining. And occasionally, a simplified hero's journey story can work for persuasion. But most of the time, a persuasion story is a much better fit. Why? Because people are used to reading and watching hero's journey stories to escape real life, not to engage in real life, to get away from it. When people want to persuade others, they talk in plainer, simpler ways than the theatrical storyteller does. In doing so, they tell much more straightforward stories. The plain, simple language, especially when it is based on the truth, is just more believable. And to persuade, you must first be believed. How does that resonate with you?
Well, first, let me say about the book. When you and I talked recently, I told everyone in my organization that you had a book coming out. Jason, the one dude works with us, good writer, good dude. He got his copy yesterday. He said he's about a third of the way through it. He really likes it, and he said to say, "Congrats on putting out the new book." So I've ordered one as well, and I was hoping it would show up so I could actually read some of it before we talked. But Amazon, dragging their backsides, I guess. So I haven't gotten mine yet, but I'll read it as soon as I get it. Anyhow. I agree. I agree with everything that you said in that passage. Like there's crutches of technique that get used well, and then they get used so much that they lose the prospect, the focusing power that they can have for prospects. Hero's journey is one of those. There's like models that are used and over relied on with a complete lack of nuance. I mean, you see this in copy all the time. You're just like, okay, here we go again with this one, And I think what you're talking about there is a question of nuance. Like, we're not saying don't use these reliable models that we know make for easy formats that have people understand where the story's going, but use them in unique and compelling ways and do the work to make sure that you're actually communicating what you think you are to the prospect. So, and I know that your book is like jam packed with ways to go about that. But yeah, Achilles heel is a modification of hero's journey that I particularly like. Right? Sure. I'm successful. I did this. I did that. I came up this way. You see this all the time in a variety of copies. And then the Achilles heel situation takes place. This was my great setback. This was my downfall and how I overcame it. Right? That's rather than the hero's journey and now I'm on top of the mountain and you can be just like me. You demonstrate a little Achilles heel, you're creating commonality with your prospect because you are subject, as the guru, you're subject to the same pitfalls and setbacks as everybody else. Via XYZ, whatever the mechanism is, I overcame this and now I've achieved this, right? It's a nuance, it's a twist on these models. So be smart about how you use that stuff. So yes, to answer your question, I agree with what you said in that passage, and it resonates quite well with me.
Well, thank you. Let me read one more thing. So I'm defining stories very differently than the world does, or the world outside of persuaders and especially salespeople and especially copywriters. I'm saying a story is something you say that has the mesmerizing effect of a story, but it might not have a beginning, a middle, end. Usually has people in it, but it can be, very short, 3-4 sentences. So I have a kind of story called stories about what your prospect is experiencing, and a particular kind called stories about your prospect's pain. Let me read you this and get your reaction. When you build your stories this way, you create a sense of motion through time, but very economically. Adding motion in this crisp way adds impact and depth to your story. And though there is motion, one thing is missing from these stories: an ending. I don't mean they're eternal stories that go on for centuries. What I mean is they're open ended on purpose, because when you have a story about a problem without a fixed ending, your reader or listener really wants to know what the ending is, and that gives you the opportunity to present your solution later as an offer, which will be much more likely, they'll be much more likely to buy since it's something they've been wanting. So to be clear, these stories are not self-contained ads or sales pitches, but they are integral components of a larger persuasive message, and they make the message that much stronger. And oh boy, one thing I'm writing here goes right back to what we were talking about at the beginning, you and me, Aaron. One more thing before we get to the stories themselves, and that's research. Making stuff up without any specific knowledge or personal experience will usually create a story that does not come across as authentic at all. Make sure this doesn't happen by doing some research ahead of time. The best kind of research is simply talking to people suffering from the problem, but that's not always possible to do. Almost as good as going onto sites that have customer comments like Amazon or discussion forums like Reddit. What you are looking for is what people describe and how they describe it when they're talking about the problem. Reading what they say will give you a lot of valuable information to create your story. And this is an example of one of those stories that I wrote for a joint pain supplement. After a while, every morning you hate to get up, not because you're sleepy. You're well rested enough. The problem is the pain in your knees. You don't feel it much at first, but after that first cup of coffee, every time you move your knees, it's like sandpaper is grinding against your bones underneath your skin. So, what does all that say to you, if anything?
Yeah, I agree with what you said there a minute ago. It's part of a larger arc, right? They're not necessarily self-contained experiences. The knee, the joint pain piece that you just quoted from, that's it's obvious to that prospect who's suffering with that problem that the person creating that message is intimately aware of what that problem looks like. That's another research point too. It's a little bit in the weeds, but describing the problem and putting the prospect, then future pacing the prospect to the point where via the solution their problem no longer exists. That's an artful process, and you need to be very careful how you do it, because one false note, the whole argument can fall apart, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot in what you just said that I would probably respond to, but yeah, no, I'm more excited than ever now for my book to arrive later today and to begin reading it, because I think you're talking about a lot of key stuff. Like I said at the beginning, like you read copy, you come across offers, and you're just like, this is false. This isn't what this prospect cares about. Well, they didn't do the work here, that type of stuff. And what you're talking about is good old fashioned brain power technique that creators can bring to what they're doing to take it to another level. So no, yeah, I'm super excited to read the book. I think
Thanks. Well,
you're on the bullseye on this one for sure.
thank you. I think Amazon North is that. Amazon, get that book to Aaron now. I don't know if that'll help, but I'm going to yell anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So if people want to get in touch with you, you said we can share your email, right? You want to say it?
Yeah. I love I love talking about what we're talking about here. I love talking about ideas. I love talking about copy. I don't financial, not financial. I love, like, you see a TV commercial. Like, I get obsessed with, just like random bits of advertising that you come across. Like, I live and breathe this stuff. So yeah, if anybody wants to talk about anything, shoot the breeze, whatever. Aaron, AARON, at MauldinEconomics.com.
Okay, and we'll put that in the show notes too. Nathan, what do you think?
Speaking of TV advertisements, everybody knows that we love the insurance commercials here on the Copywriters podcast.
Yeah,
Talking
especially the one with
geckos.
the emu. That's such a great use of the company resources.
All right. One more time before we're out of here, let people know your website and how to get a hold of you, Aaron.
The business that I'm part of, the research that we publish, is MauldinEconomics.com. My email address, Aaron at MauldinEconomics.com.
And that's AARON. Thank you so much for coming on. I think this was a great episode. I love the insight about believability versus persuasion and having the facts and the evidence to back up the claims and not leading so much on the claims. There's so much just valuable information in this episode. So thank you for coming on, and hopefully we can have you again in the near future. And if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, head on over to copywriterspodcast.com. Check out more over there. And until next time, we will catch you later.
Catch you later. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, guys. Yep.